Hi, I'm Lars-Erik Lundin, and you are listening to a podcast from the Royal Swedish Academy of War Sciences, ahead of Sweden's accession to NATO and as current rotating presidency of the European Union. This podcast focuses on an issue brief put out by the Atlantic Council and authored by Anna Wieslander, Eric Adamson and Jesper Lehto, with the title How Allied Sweden and Finland Can Secure Northern Europe. The brief was put out on January 6 this year, so it's very topical. Anna has kindly offered to introduce the brief to my colleague in the Academy, Michael Sahlin, and myself. She's eminently well placed to discuss the matter as Director for Northern Europe of the Atlantic Council and as a member of our Academy, as a Secretary General of the Swedish Defence Association and Chairman of the Board of the Institute for Security and Development Policy in Stockholm. The brief is an important contribution to the current debate on how Sweden should fit into NATO and should benefit from its present role in the EU in order to improve security in Northern Europe. In order to say something meaningful about this, one needs to know quite a lot about the structure set up and the processes developing within this framework. At the same time, it's clear that Russia's war against Ukraine and other important challenges, including lessons learned, have further concretized the challenges facing Sweden and Swedish defense. The issue brief is a developed version of an earlier paper put out in 2019 by Wieslander and another colleague, focusing on a comprehensive approach for NATO in the Northern European context. As will be obvious, the ambitious title has another meaning than one might think. Sweden and Finland are of course not able by themselves to secure Northern Europe, but their actions will set the stage for the necessary response on the part of NATO, the European Union and the member states in order to make security by deterrence through denial a continued reality in the north. Anna, and welcome back to this small podcast, which is the second. But I was a bit surprised because it's almost 2 years ago. Time flies, and one or two things have happened since we spoke last, and it's not fun to remember or remind our listeners and viewers about this evolution, which makes security policy in our region a much more traumatic issue than it was perhaps 2 years ago, when most people were taken, their attention was taken by the pandemic in particular, and it made it difficult for many people to focus, and I would even argue learn something about NATO. So you did at that time produce quite an important piece of work on what you call a comprehensive approach to how you see the Nordic region and NATO and Sweden in that context. You wanted to see a comprehensive, make a comprehensive analysis of both our transatlantic relations and of course how Europe fits in with this. We were not yet in NATO, in the NATO accession process at that time. Now we are. And now you have updated this brief together with a couple of other colleagues. And I think it's a good learning period for us now. We still have a few months, possibly longer, we don't know, until we are actually members of NATO. But it's high time for people to become more concrete in their analysis and know more about the details of what's coming up. There is this word alphabet soup, which I have encountered many times when I have been involved in multilateral, and Mikael as well, as a representative of Sweden or the EU in international relations. And many people were very tired when they hear about all these acronyms, and they wonder, and this is not least the problem for the military. How are we going to have time to go to all these meetings of all these different configurations and initiatives, bilateral, multilateral? So you make an attempt in your study to put things into perspective, to sort of order up, create some sort of order here. And maybe you want to say something initially about your intentions and your hopes when it comes to this new study.
Maybe I can add before you do, Anna, also that with the alphabet soup, Lars-Erik is referring, of course, to all the structures, all the processes that were created in our region on the basis of the perceptions and possibilities perceived at that time. Now we're on post-February 24, and we've had these new basic documents. So the question is that I would sort of tease you with now is, are things moving so fast that even the documents that we now have tend to be, or risk to become obsolete as the realities rush onwards? So let me add this as a basic question for you.
Thank you so much, and thank you for inviting me back to this podcast. I'm delighted to be here and to be able to explore a bit around the report that we just launched, or the issue brief. And just to say first that I think when it comes to the alphabet soup, as Sweden and Finland are on our way to join NATO, there will be simplifications, I think, in what we need to focus on. And what we wanted to achieve with this report is to have a look from the NATO perspective on Northern Europe at this point. Because of Russia's war in Ukraine, the whole security situation is the worst that we have experienced, I would argue, since the Second World War. And NATO is, of course, adjusting accordingly. One response to the situation is Sweden and Finland's wish to join NATO. And when we merge both where NATO is heading and what Sweden and Finland can contribute with, I believe that we have an opportunity here. And that's one of the main messages of this report, the suggestion to create a deterrence by denial bubble in Northern Europe. And by that, we not only propose a range of military measures that we can dig into, but we underline, as you both said, that this needs to be a comprehensive approach, in that military measures must be underpinned by strong resilience and robustness measures across the borders in Northern Europe. And the third dimension, linking back to the alphabet soup, is to really try and have a stronger political agenda setting that is to the benefit of Northern Europe, and to use these various forums that we have in a more targeted way, a more forward-leaning way. And in this combination, we believe that Northern Europe can position itself as a contribution to transatlantic burden sharing. And we perhaps boldly also suggest that from a position of strength in the future, when we have a post-war situation of some kind between Russia and Ukraine, such a position of strength can contribute to a new period, perhaps, of détente measures, because you need to be stronger before you can start giving in to such negotiations also, which we need, of course, in the larger picture. So this is a range of steps that we think are interlinked, and we want to see and illuminate how this could work together.
In view of developments having occurred in Ukraine and around the Ukraine war, and prospects before the spring and the possible Russian offensive, etc., is there a risk or is there any reason to ask whether this description of US policy, which is such a key to everything here, has become obsolete in any way, or does it still hold as an analysis and a reason why you're proposing what you're proposing?
Yes, I think what's important here is to look at it both from a short-term perspective and a longer-term perspective, as you're indicating as well. If you look at both US and then NATO policy when it comes to Russia, I think the threat assessment is the same in the short-term perspective. And there we have a US engagement and so on. But where it differs a bit, because with NATO, it is a regional organization with a majority of European allies, actually, even though the US leads the alliance. You have a discrepancy when it comes to the assessment of China. And that is where it becomes complicated. And the US, I think perhaps sometimes we are not daydreaming, but there is a sense of a little bit of wishful thinking, I believe, from the European side of view, that the US would drop its what we, from a European side, sometimes believe are almost an obsession with China, and perhaps come to their senses and say that you can balance, you could do a little bit of cooperation, a little bit of competition. Our understanding. And the US just released a range of strategies: the national security strategy, the national defense strategy, the nuclear review, and so on, is that this is not the case. China is the coming decade. That's the big competition and the big battle. And when it comes to Russia, and for countries such as Sweden, Finland, and all of us we can never escape from our geographic position. We will always have to deal with Russia, as we also point out here. Our big question is, how do we keep the UN's engagement in the best way? So we can, call the wolf is coming, call the wolf is coming. And we suggest that probably that's not good enough. We should make a substantial contribution to burden sharing and kind of acknowledge that China will be demanding for the US. And it will not only be conventionally demanding, it will be commanding from a nuclear perspective as well. The assessment is that in 2030, the US has to face two major strategic adversaries also when it comes to nuclear weapons, as China is building its nuclear arsenal so quickly and expanding it. So I believe that, and also if you look at NATO, I think we touch upon it a bit. China has entered the agenda of NATO, not in a military sense, because there is no military planning that involves China, and capability development within NATO is not focused on meeting any kind of, dealing with China in any way. But
so far,
exactly. Some would add so far. And a lot of the discussions in NATO on the political side are about China, perhaps not as focused as that could be, but still, and when I was at NATO headquarters in September interviewing, someone told me that, well, Sweden and Finland used to be closest partners, and now you are soon allies, and our next closest partners, I believe, that's China, that's Japan and Australia. That's Japan and Australia. So that's the mental shift that we have to face. And therefore, I think we need to be constructive, and we need to take our own security seriously, and understand how this might evolve, and also be explicit towards the US and Washington. What can our contribution actually be?
And who are we in this case then?
This is, I think, Sweden. These are perhaps the European allies. I would argue, yes, within the transatlantic framework, because that's how we have to anchor it now.
But you still have a North European actor perspective also.
Yeah.
Yes, I do, because the forefront of the strategic competition, it's in Northern Europe to a large extent now. I mean, if you compare to the Cold War, we had the buffered zone in a way, and now it's a direct confrontation. The line between being an ally and a non-ally, and even the biggest adversary we have, that's a direct line up here. That's a big difference, and that's also because that's what we have heard from the Baltic states and Poland during the Ukraine war. Pushing for a change of NATO from a deterrence by punishment strategy, which was adopted in 2014, or they say, well, what will there be to reconquer? Look at how Russia is conducting its warfare in Ukraine. they destroy, and then there's nothing left, and they roll over. So we need to strengthen that denial dimension, and that's also what NATO has decided to do. That's the strategy ahead, and that is what Sweden and Finland will enter into soon. And I think that's how we can make a collective contribution up here in Northern Europe. And I see this area, one of the comprehensive approaches, not only connecting the military with the political side, but geographically also we have been advocating for, and I think that's how most people see it now, that the Baltic Sea and the Arctic and also the North Atlantic are interconnected areas from a military strategic point of view, and we need to see it like that. But I think a lot of people acknowledge it now, but you can still hear, no, it's not about the Baltic states, it's about the Nordkalotte or the Arctic, or you have to understand it's about Gothenburg and the North Atlantic. And we say, no, please don't fragment it. Please see how it's connected. And of course, there are always, there's not an indefinite amount of resources, and you have to prioritize and so on. But from a military planning point of view, while you are doing those prioritizations and planning procedures, you need to see how those areas are interconnected and how you can best work to build that kind of deterrence levels that we need.
I just wanted to add, when I asked, so who are we? I of course refer to what you have answered now, and the question, the various circles that we have tried to portray in our region, and the need to somehow have a simpler but also more sort of strategically valid configuration. And that leads me to also ask you if you think, I think you write in your paper, about the Northern Europe that consists also of not only the Nordic countries and the Baltics, but also Germany and Poland. Not the Netherlands any longer, apparently. You had this North European configuration, apropos whatever may be a little bit obsolete. But are you seeing it as a problematic thing or not? To conceive of rearming Poland and hesitant to Germany, but on the verge of doing more in defense. Is that unproblematic in order to mobilize this grouping of North European countries that would share the bubble, so to speak? Or is it, am I over problematizing when I even ask this?
No, I think you're right. I mean, we need to, this will be a bit breaking new grounds, I think, because this format, even though you have formats such as the Northern Group, you don't really have it in a very strong way. But the way we have been analyzing it and looking at it, I think, I mean, Poland is really a coming power. They invest a lot in military resources, and now they are also on the border towards Ukraine. And you can notice in various forums, also within the EU, that Poland is more, it's a little bit of a go-to country, actually, for quite a few countries. And we are not perhaps used to see it like that, but I think we need to, from time to time, we have developed a lot of cooperation with Poland, but we need to take that one step further and perhaps include the Poland more than we have done in the past. I think there is preference, and we feel very comfortable working with the Nordic countries, for instance, and a bit of a relief that now that we all are becoming NATO members, we can really have a Nordic Union. But that is not, I mean, that is not what we're entering. We are entering NATO. And I think also if you ask both the Norwegians and the Danes, there are limits still to how, or they would say, well, we should not create a NATO within NATO in that sense. Nordic cooperation is fine. We have suggestions along within the Nordic circle as well, for instance, on air dominance. But still, it's not the solution for everything. And Germany is, of course, also a big challenge going through its Zeitenwende, just as Sweden and Finland are perhaps going through Zeitenwende. And there are huge discussions on is Germany at all capable of leading, and I think a lot of ongoing criticism on Germany in various ways, but still, I mean, you cannot dismiss. I still think there is a big. Germany is a Baltic Sea nation. It's a big European ally. It's the fourth biggest economy in the world. It's embedded within NATO in all its defense and security efforts. And therefore, I mean, we need to work constructively with Germany and engage Germany more in northern issues. That's a bit of a learning process, actually, because Germany, to my understanding and the discussions I have in Berlin, it's pretty new for Germany to look north. They have just been a continental power.
But they are enormously welcoming to our entrance into NATO.
Yeah.
Yes, they are, and I think this is also an opportunity. And now they have a very, I mean, it's a big defense budget there. So let's work together. That's what I'm saying. Both Poland and Germany are expanding. So let's find the best solutions. Let's not miss this opportunity to connect the region in the strongest possible way. I mean, the UK, you have already engaged, and you have the Joint Expeditionary Force, which we haven't really expanded upon in the issue brief, because we believe that you can do that, of course, but you have to draw the line somewhere. And there has been a lot of development within the JEF, and that has been, I mean, it's a strong reassurance measure for Sweden and Finland during the accession process, for instance. You have the Netherlands taking part in the JEF. So, of course, there are dots, and we're not like completely excluding the Netherlands. But if you combine both the military with the robustness, the resilience, and the political side, I think the Netherlands falls a little bit too much to the continental side to be part of what we see as the core up here in the north.
Will the JEF survive the full entrance into NATO of Sweden and Finland, you think? Or is it a way to keep the UK on board in a transatlantic pro-European sense?
Well, it's an interesting question, and perhaps I think it's a bit of an open question. I think JEF will survive because, I mean, politely, the UK has anchored it in NATO as a framework nation concept. They did that already in 2014. Although it's mostly a British tool, I think, for regional power projection. It has been, I think, interestingly developed as a tool for the below Article 5 kind of scenario. If we talk about this, the hybrid environment that we are working in and daily have to deal with. The JEF is supposed to be agile and to send signals and to be, part of very early kind of deterrence measures. I think that's wise. You could probably build even more on it. But the problem with the JEF is that it does not include the Germans nor the Poles, actually. So it has some limitations as well, where if you go again to the Germans, they would ask questions, on this and how it's supposed to be developed, and
they have their proposal for a format also.
Exactly. So this is not, again, I don't think the JEF is the solution to everything. As it looks, it's a pretty, it's a valuable contribution to security here. In the region, and I think the Brits will continue to put energy into that format, but we need to do other things as well.
Yeah. Can I sort of recap a little bit here, because I think you started off in a global perspective, and you noted that obviously there have been some changes when it comes to China, but fundamentally China remains something that we have to always keep in mind. And then when you come closer to the alliance, and it's as a regional organization, and you mentioned the European Union, I mean, there I assume that you find it easier today in your brief to draw attention to the potential synergies between the EU and NATO than you did probably 2 years ago, when the EU was still very much a sort of a hypothetical actor in security policy. There we have a big difference, I suppose, that would give your idea of a comprehensive approach across the board, including resilience, much more substance than we could have seen or could have recognized just 2 years ago. And then on the third level, when you go down inside Europe, I think Michael's question about Poland and Germany is sort of, as we say in Swedish, or in German, aha-erlebnis. Because when we have been working with the project inside the Academy about the future of Europe, many colleagues have found it difficult to include Germany and Poland in a serious way into our defense planning perspectives, noting, that, Germany doesn't really try at the time, and also bulking the Visegrad countries together in a way which today seems a little bit more theoretical, since the threat perceptions are so different between the different Visegrad countries. And when we talk to Hungarian and other friends, of course, they have a quite different outlook than what you see now in a high alert and extremely mobilized Polish context.
And you still have France. You still have to add France also to the.
Yes, and so we have a sort of the question is, one would not have been able a couple of years ago, when you wrote this, the previous version of the brief, to see the very important distinction, I think, between the degree of concern about the security situation between, on the one hand, we have an East-West dimension inside Europe, where obviously countries a little bit further away from Ukraine are less worried about the situation, or more, and then you have the North-South, when some countries towards the South are more concerned about what happens in the South and in Africa and so on. But we clearly can say that Germany and Poland now are as countries very close to our thinking in terms of the dramatic nature of the security threats. And on top of all of this, what you have also seen, I assume that when you write this new brief, that it's much easier to say that deterrence is not just nuclear. Deterrence is an ability to show that we are willing to and ready to fight to defend our freedom and our sovereignty with conventional means. And that what seemed to be a very theoretical discussion, because everyone was thinking of, well, if there is war in Europe, there will be a nuclear war. No, not necessarily. And this is what makes your analysis now so much more pertinent, it seems to me, than it would have been, in just 2 or 3 years ago, when people were thinking in much more abstract terms. What would a war in Europe, what could it be?
Because now we have the lessons learned from Ukraine.
Yeah.
To add.
Exactly. I think that's when it comes to our second pillar there on robustness and resilience, EU-NATO cooperation. This war has been such an eye-opener, I think, in many ways. Both when it comes to, of course, the Ukrainian will to fight and the will to resist and the will to really bounce back in a resilient way. I mean, just look at how their energy infrastructure is hit time by time by time. They repair it, and it's really one of their most important strategic communication messages is that, we will not bend down on this. The energy security weapon that Russia has been pulling for a long time, now we see it, and now as in the EU, finally acted on it. So I think this is in a way simpler, as you say. Because it affects each one of us can make a difference here. Not only preparations, but mentally as well, and understanding that this is a human factor in it. But on the institutional side, I think the war has also been an eye-opener. In a way, reality killed the cat, in that the EU, to my mind, has been much more realistic in how it's cooperating with NATO since the war started. The proposals and the developments that we see are much more realistic in a way. What are the strengths of the EU? Well, its budget, its control of legislation, infrastructure, the most civilian parts. While it's so obvious that NATO is the one that will have to deal with collective defense and including the nuclear deterrent factor. I mean, there is no interest at all within the EU to you mentioned France. France has put the French nuclear umbrella on the table in the EU. I mean, all those ideas, I haven't heard anything of that during this year. It's been really quite a realistic discussion. So in that sense, I think what we've seen at procurement is another issue that the EU is dealing with in innovation, dual use, defense and technology. Still, it's not a lot of money either in the EU actually that it puts out as stimulus to get this. So I think the whole idea, just strategic autonomy, I was asked what is it still alive? Well, I guess it's not completely dead. I'm sure it will pop up at some point again as a concept, but it's much more realistic now. And we believe there is, as we also propose on the resilience part, take a flagship project such as military mobility, which was, I think it's a very interesting example because it has to do with how quickly you can move troops from the western part of NATO and the EU to the eastern flank and also up north or down to the south, for instance, because now the Black Sea is also part of this and the Med. And there you need the EU for a lot of things here, both building roads, the railways, bridges, standards, logistic, transport centers, being able to transfer ammunition, because we're not perhaps talking about a wartime situation. We're talking about deterrence in a peacetime legislative situation. So all this needs to work.
Yes.
Yes, if I may add on that one, personally, I see the EU as a catalyst, that it enables. Not least the private sector to do its work, regulates the system, provides a level playing field for the private sector to be able to move on certain innovations standard on the basis of established standards. And there it's very important to say that already 20 years ago, there was the beginning of the work of harmonizing NATO and EU standards, very much built upon NATO terminology and NATO. So I'm really hopeful there that what we will see is that it creates much more out of limited money, actually, relatively limited money through the EU. And here we are talking about the community work. I mean, not second pillar, not the intergovernmental part of the EU. We are talking about mobilizing a community. And it's in that sense good that we have a commission president, I suppose, that who has a background as a defense minister herself. So
I've been here, Anna, and develop some thoughts concerning what you said about the strategic autonomy. In your paper, you, as we said before, you are describing a situation where there is a demand from the US for greater complementarity and greater participation in order to allow for fuller cooperation and complementarity, and hence your proposals concerning Northern Europe. I see similar signs of, you said Macron has not spoken so much now about autonomy in terms of something instead of, or something to replace something. And I think that he too realizes, and take for example, what Kissinger has been saying only recently about his conviction now that in some cases, and we are in such a situation now, where deterrence and making a sort of taking a stand and not seeking balancing games in world politics. And I think that Macron similarly is talking now or thinking now along the lines of complementarity, not seeing strategic autonomy as an alternative or at the expense of NATO, but rather seeing that clearly NATO is now the main actor in terms of hard security. It has to be like that as a necessity as a result of both Ukraine and Russia and China.
Yes, I agree. I think the French were already, before even the Russian full-scale invasion on February 24th, more realistic in how they described, I believe, European autonomy or sovereignty when it comes to military measures. And they pushed, while Macron in 2019 said that, in my mind, Europe can defend itself. He said in an interview with The Economist, in which he also declared NATO brain dead. I think that caught more attention. But still, for me, it was interesting that he made the statement that in his view, Europe could defend itself, because a lot of countries did not agree with that statement. And on the contrary, were quite concerned in how to keep US engagement for Europe, because we could not defend ourselves. However, now much more realistic in terms of, no, that's not now. It could be in a decade or 15 years if we decide so. And I think that you can also trace from France, and I have experienced this in war gaming and so on, that when the situation is really serious on a global, this war with Russia's war has global implications as well. Then France understands, that, and looks to the US actually to lead, because then obviously US is the biggest ally. And someone said that could it have been de Gaulle who called during the Cuba Missile Crisis to the Kennedy administration and said in English, we will support you. I heard this story, someone told me, and for me that sounds a little bit how the French are actually reasoning when it's a very serious situation. I think the French position has to some extent been a consequence of a bit of a different threat assessment from Russia. We have seen an emphasis from President Macron trying to have a strategic security dialogue with Russia, and all of this, which was also very much criticized from Baltic states, Poland, and others along the eastern flank, who said that we cannot call and have a dialogue when we don't have a position of strength. And we should not, in this way, we are encouraging more or less Russian behavior because they can't see that we don't oppose it. While the French or Macron's view was that we need to have this kind of dialogue and try, at least we need to try. And I think the threat assessment in Paris has changed realistically, and we have to remember also that. Also in Mali, which has been very much of a preoccupation for France, Russia has kind of pushed France out of Mali through the Wagner Group, and that is also a big something that has affected the French way of thinking on defense during 2022, actually. So we have two combined forces here.
Well, initially the French went into, I remember that very well from the beginning of the millennium, that the French initially were more concerned about the Chinese, actually. That's why they argued that we would needed to establish CSTP capabilities to sort of help France to not to appear there alone, so to say, but help to appear there together with other European countries, not under UN umbrella alone. So now clearly it's more Russia, as you mentioned, Wagner. Anna, I don't think we should prolong the podcast too long. So for my part, I would like to recap again and just come back and challenge you if I understood two things well from your brief. And then Michael can take up his remaining questions. There are 2 points. You have a very provoking title. How allied Sweden and Finland can secure Northern Europe. I think many people say, well, we can't. Absolutely not. But you have put forward, in reality, as I see it, 2 arguments why this is an essential perspective. Namely, if we don't try and make an effort to promote security up in Northern Europe, we will not get the help we need from the others. So it's a way to catalyze and mobilize support to defend what in the north-south direction almost will be half of Europe in terms of the borderline to Russia. I think it seems to me to be the fundamental interpretation of the title, that this is not that we are not going to secure Northern Europe, but we are going to be able to, through our efforts, to help to mobilize the efforts of the others and the support from the Americans, but also from important regional powers. And among these regional powers, we now also have to include not only the UK, but also very much Germany and Poland and so on. So that's one thing. And the other thing is courtesy to the future NATO allies. I was told at a very early stage working with NATO in multilateral diplomacies, don't divide NATO into different parts. We are one alliance. We have a cohesion and we have solidarity among our members. You have to understand that. That's what I was told, as a non-aligned representative in the old days. I think this is more important than ever, and that the outreach that you are proposing in the brief, that we even should look south towards the 3 lakes initiative or 3 seas, I don't know if it's lakes or seas, indicate that we have to be interested in the problems of others as well in this context. And there is going to be a very delicate discourse inside NATO, I suppose, about how to establish the different commands, which command is Brunsum and Norfolk and so on. How is it all going to be balanced up? We don't know the outcome of that. We only know that we as Sweden will have to enter that discussion also listening, not just telling others what we think would be best. So that's one political and actually 2 political interpretations of your brief. Have I understood you correctly?
Yes, I think that's an excellent summary. Thank you. That's perfect. Yeah.
Time for me to add some final thoughts from me, or would you like to say more than that this was an excellent summary?
Just to develop a little bit on what you say on understand, this is NATO is all members, and you don't exclude. We have a few suggestions there. We call it the 3. It relates to the 360 approach, which is basically NATO's way of saying that threats can look differently from where you are in the alliance, but we need to take everyone seriously. And I think that's a learning process that we need to understand. And we suggest, for instance, that Sweden and Finland send and participate with troops from time to time to enhanced forward presence, perhaps in Romania, by the Baltic Sea, by the Black Sea. I hear this quite often as a suggestion. And that would not only to show solidarity and so on, but actually I think be open to learn a bit of how do you perceive things down there, and bring that back. And as you said, the 3 Seas initiative, it is an initiative that connects the Adriatic with the Black Sea and the Baltic Sea, connects us with a range of countries. And if you talk about robustness and resilience, it's not only within within the north, we also need to see how those lines and flows go from the north to the south, to the east, to the west. And in that way, I think we need to expand our views, and that will be to the benefit of us.
And now on a new basis.
On a new basis, because the little world in the headline that makes all the difference is allied.
Yes.
How allied Sweden and Finland can secure Northern Europe.
And I kept saying for some time, since I'm a former envoy to Norway, that we have a lot to learn from Norway and what it takes to conduct value-based policies globally while remaining a staunch proponent of and defender of core task of NATO. So that's an interesting and I think inspiring combination. Now I would like to add from my side two things. I like your paper a lot because I think one learns a lot from even the terminology and the lingo from the NATO world, so to speak, and you're very well versed in that, so that's very useful. And also the way you say or talk about the combination of the new US policies as enshrined in those latest document. I was asking you before about whether they too are becoming obsolete fast in view of developments, but you have responded to that already. And then you have the fact that this all means that there must be a sort of a medium at the new level of activity, so to speak, and burden sharing also globally in the various ways that we said. And there is a lot of drama developing in Southeast Asia now with Japan's new steps and with South Korea apparently considering their own nuclear weapons. At least they have said so. And you have North Korea and you have Taiwan and what have you. So there is a brewing drama there too, which will, as you say, necessarily occupy a lot of U.S. interest in various ways. So I would leave you from me now with reminding of that we have, and you would expect me to say so, you have a Turkish angle to this, both as a hindrance to some aspects of EU-NATO cooperation, as we know, and also as if I may say so, a spoiler factor in terms of not only the Finnish, the Swedish case, but also being sort of acting and approaching elections now from a value basis, which is very different from NATO core statutes. And you have that problem, and it is discussed in Washington today. But then you have also the problem of the US and uncertainties pertaining to the 24 elections and moods in the among the GOP. So, I mean, what would your thoughts to be shared with us be on those two things? I mean, we have a Turkish-Hungarian, if you like, sort of dissenter faction within NATO, and you have the questions concerning the way ahead for the US as a democracy. And then you have the indispensability of the transatlantic link. Do you see problems or do you see overcomeabilities there?
Well, I'm an optimist, so I mostly see opportunity. I mean, of course, these are challenges. We don't really control them. You were asking in the beginning, what kind of proposals can we move on if we don't become members soon, if Turkey keeps on blocking us, for instance. I think a range of these proposals we can still work on. It will be even stronger, but we can start preparations, and basically it's up to we are now participating in all of NATO's committees except for the nuclear planning group. We are part of the capability development, and we are going through our defenses and so on. And so, of course, you can take in a lot of it already. Nothing prevents us from working more forward-leaning on the political cooperation side, or we can go as long as we want within the EU as members. when it comes to resilience, robustness, and so on. So it's to some extent it's a vision, way of thinking that I am encouraging us to apply better. And then I think we always have to think about, in these times, I get a lot of questions also on the US, as you say, where is the US heading as a democracy, and where will it lead, and so on. Well, we don't know that, of course, but we sure can see the alternative, can't we? If we look at Beijing and how China is acting in the world. We are part of a strong political alliance, the EU, so we have a strong platform there to work on a value base. Within the EU, we also have our problems with some members. Hungary is also a member of the EU, and even if the EU
and Poland.
And Poland, exactly. So, I mean, sometimes you hear that why doesn't NATO have a clause that can exclude members that become, too autocratic? Well, you know this better than I, but I believe EU has some kind of ways of excluding members. But do you use it? Well, it's very, very difficult. I mean, it's almost a rhetorical question, right? At what point do you exclude another country? And that is actually why NATO does not have it. It's not that it was not considered. It was considered. There were several proposals on it, but at that time, now I've become a bit historic, but I think the parallel is interesting. At that time, it was about communism. Would communism be infiltrated through European states, perhaps through parliamentary processes? And then you would have, close connections to the adversary, the aggressor, the Soviet Union, through the democratic processes. Now you can see similar things like that. You would speculate, how close is Turkey to Russia? How close is Hungary to Putin, and so on. But still, the matter of excluding a country from a political community or institution, that's not an easy process. You have to deal with the politics. And that's what we have to do as well here, I think. Now it seems with Turkey we get a bit of help from the US, perhaps in to see if that will fly. There are no guarantees, as I see it. So we will have to live with these uncertainties that surround us, and therefore, but there are a lot of practical steps and measures that we could take to move forward. We don't need to be paralyzed in any way, as I see it.
My views on this would take too long for this podcast, but I look forward to talking to you about it. But congratulations on a very interesting paper.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
Thank you.
Great.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Yes, and thank you for having me. Thank you.